Good afternoon, students. Welcome to this additional session on Construction 2. We've received quite a number of questions on assignment number 2, question 3 specifically, so I'll just quickly give you a few hints on what to look out for when you do this question. Alright, so the question basically asks you to do 6 things, and I'll just quickly go over the information that's difficult for you to maybe find and that you might not have encountered before. So for instance, the first part, role players, that's easy stuff. That's money for jam basically. You can go and think about that, but that would typically be the professional team, the employer, the contractors, the subcontractors, the local community, anybody like that that's going to have some kind of benefit from this specific project. The BCA classifications, alright, that's also easy stuff. You can find that not too difficult using your access to the NCC or the National Construction Code as it is known now. So the stuff that you might find yourself struggling with is basically the last 4 sections of the question. So the identification of the work packages, the different procurement strategies, and then of course the identification of the contracts and also how to draw a sketch. So if we look at the first one there, the identification of work packages, what are work packages? Well, work packages are basically, if you think about an elephant and how you're going to eat an elephant, it is obviously you're going to break down the elephant into smaller pieces, and this is exactly what we want to do with a project. We're going to break it down into smaller pieces, so it's the lower level of the project, and it's typically a level 4 or a level 5 on a work breakdown structure. And a work package is basically something that you can outsource to a third party or a subcontractor, another contractor that can take care of that for you. So typically you would use subcontractors to do that, and a good example of that would be the electrical and plumbing. So looking at what we have in this example, I would definitely start looking at the earthworks, civil works, foundation, concrete, anything like that, the superstructure, and there you can obviously take the superstructure into different areas, and also the processing plants that you're going to have. You can also start thinking about the tank farm, but the tank farm has something strange to it, and we'll talk about the tank farm a little bit later on. Alright, so that should get you on the way with work packages. So basically what it is, it's basically something that you can outsource. It's a lower level on your work breakdown structure for this project. And if we look at a simple sketch, this is just another project that we've worked on before. You can see each of these colored areas is considered a different work package. Alright, so for instance, in this project we were going to build a brewery, for instance, the buildings were being constructed by a specific company. The steam generation systems was designed and installed by another group, and so on. And you can see that each of these items over here becomes effectively a work package on its own. So there you can see there's the first part of the answer already forming, and you should already have a good idea of what to do now. Alright, so that's the first one that we wanted to look at. So we can say definitely that one is ticked off. We're happy with that one. So the next one that we have to do is the procurement strategies, and what are they all about? And for this question you need to think about it, because this will be typically an area where you haven't been before. Alright, so this will be new. You need to go and do research on the EPC and EPCM and all of those types of contractual relationships that we have. We'll talk about the first 2 over here in a few minutes, and I'll explain to you how it works. Now, the reason I'm explaining these two to you should already give you an indication of what to include in your answer. Alright, so giving away some of the marks over here, it is either that one or that one. Alright, so these are the options that we have. So what are the differences between an EPC and an EPCM? We'll look at those just now. What do we use professional services contracts for? Basically anything that we do not do physical work on site for. Alright, so this contract does not address physical site risk. It only addresses, you're basically selling hours. So engineers, quantity surveyors, building designers, anybody like that would use a professional services contract. Something that you have to remember, that when we talk about geologists, and the geologists do tests on site, be careful when you use a professional services contract for them, because they actually do come onto site and they do actually do work on site. Alright, so keep that in mind. Term services contract, if we have activities that we have to complete and we are going to have it for a specific term, we can use a term services contract. Or if we have a framework contract, not for this question, but a framework contract will typically cover a set of activities with a range of different contractors for the employer. So if we move on to the next slide, the first one that we're going to discuss is just the EPC, or the engineer, procure and construct, and this is a typical project. So when do we use an EPC? Well, first, when the scope is well defined by the client. So the question that you have to ask in your question in this case study is, does the client already know what he wants? Is he 100% sure? Is he going to give us a well-defined scope? Right, if the scope is not well defined, we have to start ask questions. Right, we have to say, alright, who's going to define the scope? Who's going to do the work? How is it going to work? So in this case, be careful when you talk about the EPC. Alright, so if the scope is poorly defined, we can split the project in two parts. Alright, and that will mean that the PSC will take care of the generation of the scope for us, while the execution of the contract after we've already created the scope document will be in a normal construction or construction execution type contract. Alright, important over here, EPC excludes startup and commissioning. If we look at a turnkey project, important for this one, it's a technology that belongs to a turnkey provider. The turnkey contractor is going to do all the detailed engineering and design for us. He's going to supply the equipment, construct everything, and he is going to commission it. Alright, so remember earlier I spoke about tank farms. Alright, so what are tank farms? Tank farms are basically just a collection of tanks. Alright, so there we have a collection of tanks, and you'll see when you go past refineries, breweries, any kind of plant, typically there will be tank farms visible from the road. Alright, so how do we do it? These are items that are technology driven. They're designed by turnkey contractors. So a hint would be to outsource the whole of the tank farm installation for this question to a specific contractor. Alright, they will come in, install it, provide the technology, and make sure that when they commission it and they start it up, everything works according to plan. So what does a typical EPC or turnkey or management contract look like? And we can see over here, this is the layout that we're going to have. Typically you'll have the employer over here. The employer will always sit on top, and a different name for an employer would just be client. The PMBOK refers to buyer. Alright, so there's different ways of talking about the employer. The main contractor in this case takes all of the responsibility. Right, you can see all of the responsibility below this line becomes to the main contractor. So all the subcontractors, all the consultants that's going to work on this project report directly into the main contractor. The main contractor has a single contract over there. Alright, so there's our single contract. With the employer, these guys do not have, the subcontractors, they do not have any access to the employer from a contractual point of view. Alright, so keep that in mind. Alright, when we look at the EPCM, this is typically the fastest growing contractual strategy in Australia, where we have the engineering, procurement for and on behalf of, and construction management. Alright, so remember, there's one part over there, engineer, which is the same as drawing or designing. Procure for and on behalf of, important, so that means that the invoices will have the employer's name on it, but the procurement itself will be done by the EPCM contractor. And over here, this is a construction management function. So the EPCM contractor is not going to do any physical work on site. Right, so typically this is going to be reimbursable because the EPCM contractor is a manager. He sells hours to the employer. Right, so what does it include? Engineering and design, procurement for and on behalf of, and then of course the management of the construction effort. So if we look at this one, what does it look like? And this is typically what we'll see. We'll have the employer, there's our EPCM contractor, there's a single contract over there to our EPCM contractor. Alright, and what you can see is the contractual relationship with the executing contractor is between the employer and the main contractor. However, the management function comes from our project manager and our quality manager over here that belongs to our EPCM contractor. Alright, so this question will ask you to draw diagrams in the last part, and this is typically what the diagram will look like. You will have to, on this line over here, write the name of the contract. So for instance, this will be a professional services contract. Alright, so you will have to go and find the Australian standard for the professional services contract, or alternatively you can use the NEC, New Engineering Contract, or FIDIC, or any of those contracts that will suit your typical scenario. Alright, so remember the main key here is the EPCM contractor does not do any of the physical work on site. Alright, so there's a little bit more graphical show of how an EPCM works. You can see there's our employer over there, the representatives or the joint steering committee. There's an input into the EPCM consultant, and he is going to do all of the design work. Alright, so what don't you see over here? You don't see any site work on this slide. Alright, remember this guy doesn't do any site work. Alright, the site work will come straight from the employer. Alright, so the employer will have. Alright, so remember this guy is not going to do any of the site work himself. Alright, so if we look at the management function, the project manager and the construction manager over there, they also form part of our EPCM team that sits over there. Alright, so if we look at a functional diagram of what this is supposed to look at, there you can see our employer sits on the one side. He's got an engineering construction contract relationship with the construction contractor over here, and he's got a professional services relationship with our EPCM. Alright, so all of this in this little circle over here is the EPCM. Alright, so the EPCM sits over there, and all of that stuff sits there. Alright, and these are all the functions that our EPCM contractor is going to fulfill. Right, so that's important for us to remember. If we now think about the risk that's associated with the different types of contracts, there you can see an activity schedule type contract. Over here the employer's risk is at a minimum, meaning that the contractor is going to try his utmost to do a good and fast job, because the less time he spends on the job, the more profit he's going to make. If we start selecting a bill of quantities or a target type contract, you can see the employer's risk starts increasing over here, and our contractor's incentive starts going down. Why is that? Because now our contractor is saying, right, for if we're going to go for a bill of quantities, everything is remeasured at the end, so therefore we're going to be paid for all the work that we're going to do. If we start thinking about a cost reimbursable contract, it's really expensive for the employer. Why? Because all of the costs that the contractor encounters on a project will be reimbursed by the employer. Alright, so that's really important to remember that. If we finally think about the question, here is an example of how you could look at answering the last slide, which is the draw a sketch. Basically, there's our project management consultant, the type of contract that we want over there, and that will give you a good go of where to go. Alright, so these are the work packages that we have over there. For this solution, this isn't the answer for your question, but this will give you a good start over there. Alright, so I hope the additional information helps you.